Hello, everyone. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. If you don't mind, I'm going to stay seated because I'm a little not feeling that great today. So we're going to talk about Thanksgiving, and I think it's a new theme for the month. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the first of 3 topics about Thanksgiving. So can you hear me well? Yeah? Okay, everyone? All right. So the first talk today is about why we should give thanks. Why should we give thanks? Let's hear from you first. Let's go around and just tell me what your thoughts are. Why do you think we should give thanks to God?
To be content.
To be content. Okay.
To be grateful for what Jesus did for us.
To be grateful. Okay. Anyone else? Is it because we have to? Is it because we're commanded to? There is a command in the Bible, right? In Thessalonians, it says, give thanks in all circumstances. So there is a command in the Bible, and sometimes we're tempted to think, is God this severe master who is, almighty and who demands that we thank him, and he threatens that if we don't, then bad things will happen to us, and that's why we're obligated to do it? Or is it really that there's something more to it than that? Is he threatening us, or is he trying to draw out of us the fact that there's something good about Thanksgiving? There's something good for us about Thanksgiving. God takes pleasure in seeing us be happy. And we know that because he tells us that in the Bible. And because he's our maker, he knows what will make us happy. And he knows that when we give thanks for the things that we have, no matter how little, how they may appear to be little, that will ultimately make us happy. He doesn't need our thanks. We need to be thankful. And we need to be thankful because it's ultimately the benefit will come back to us. And that pleases him. So this is just a kind of a high-level, overarching concept, but let's dig a little deeper. So why do we not give thanks for the many things that God gives us? First of all, do we all recognize that God gives us a lot of things? Yeah. Okay, there are a lot of nods. I also know people that I know one person in particular, but there are quite a few people that are just not thankful because they feel that God is just treating them so harshly. And they see that because they're looking around them and comparing themselves to others around them. Reminds me of one of those psychology tests that they do on people. So they ran this psychology test one time, and they gave everybody a white sheet of paper with a black dot on it and told them to describe what they see. And almost everyone tried to find ways to describe that black dot in one way or another. Some more sophisticated than others. Some just stated the fact that there was a black dot in the middle of the page, and so on. And none of them recognized that there's so much white space in there they were just totally oblivious to. And all they focused on was that one black dot. Is that not exactly what we do in our lives? We have so much white space in our lives, so many graceful and grateful things to be grateful for, that we tend to take for granted and focus only on the 1 or 2 or 3 things that happen to us that may be black dots in our day or black dots in our lives. And that's how we miss out on living that life of thanksgiving that our church teaches us to live. So we end up taking a lot for granted those little things, starting from the small breath of fresh air that that we get in the morning when we wake up and open that window, to the warm slippers that we slip into at night before we go to bed, and passing by everything from the little laughter of a little baby that we love to the joyous enjoyment of company of friends, to the savory bite that we had in our Thanksgiving turkey dinner. All of these little things are things that we just take for granted, and therefore we don't see a need to give thanks to God for. And yet they all point to something much, much, much greater and much, much bigger. And so together I want us to start looking at those little things as channels that allow us to see what's awaiting us in heaven. And these are nothing but just little glimpses of those great, magnificent things that await us out there. There was I'll come to that later. So no pleasure really, and I use the word pleasure intentionally here because those little things should give us pleasure, but none of those little things, those little gifts, those little pleasures is too small to really help us, to preach us about how to look for those kind acts and merciful acts and good acts that God gives us, that God is actually bombarding us with every single day, all day long. And again, we miss them out because we just take them for granted. So there's that little story also I heard of, I think it was a father saying, one day he decided to wake up, he woke up early. He knows that his son is going to go to work. He needs to shine his shoes before he goes to work. So he decides to just, he was up early. He decides to shine the shoe for his son before he wakes up. The son wakes up, ready to shine his shoes, and they're shined the right, I don't know if it's shined or shown or whatever. It's done, right? Shined, I guess. So it's done for him. And so he's happy, right? He's very thankful, very grateful, puts them on, goes to work. Next day, same thing is happening again. He's surprised, he's thankful, he's happy, puts them on, goes to work. And this now happens every day. The father is taking pleasure in having his son be happy. The son is happy that this is happening to him. And so time goes on, days pass, weeks pass, months pass, years pass, and it's what happens every day. And then one day the son wakes up and the shoes are not shined, and he takes a fit and he goes and starts cussing at his dad, and he's very upset because now he's going to be late for work. Now he has to do this himself, and he's so upset, and he grows a tantrum. How would we describe that son? What would we think of that son? What's one word to describe the son?
Ungrateful.
Ungrateful. Okay. At the very least, we would say ungrateful. We could go much further and say, what he said was very inappropriate, right? Spoiled brat, yeah, exactly. But isn't that exactly what we do with God? We wake up every day taking that first breath, and we just take it for granted, right? He's given us that breath every single day of our lives. Why wouldn't he today? We walk, and we just assume we're going to be able to walk. We assume we can put on our clothes ourselves. We assume we can, our family is going to be, in well and the same like they were the day before and around us. We assume a lot of things every single day just because God did it for us day after day after day after day. But if he ever stops one day doing any of those things, if we wake up one day and we can't put our clothes on ourselves, or if we find one of our family members ill, or God forbid, not there anymore, we throw a tantrum, right? And God, why? Why did you allow that to happen? Why did you do this? And we start becoming very, very ungrateful, if not much worse. So when we stop back a little bit and look at the big picture and realize that those are all little gifts that God is giving us, not because he has to, but because he wants to. He takes pleasure in pleasing us. We stand a much better chance of actually finding reasons to be thankful for God. Not because he commands us to, but because we have that gratitude, that feeling of gratification that allows us to do that thanking out of our hearts. There was a quote here by Pope Shenouda. Yeah, he says, the essence of thanksgiving is giving thanks with a heart full of love rather than a mind preoccupied with obligations. God doesn't want to hear thanks from us because he told us to, or because we feel obligated to. He wants to hear the thanks from us because we're happy to do that, because that is what pleases him. And when he's happy, when we're happy giving him thanks, he's happy receiving that thanksgiving from us. And guess what happens in return? His graciousness and his mercies just multiply. There's one of the desert saints said something that's really, really nice. He goes, no gift is without increase except that which is without thanksgiving. In Arabic, ليس عطية بلا زيادة إلا التي بلا شكر. Every gift that we get from God is bound to increase unless we don't thank for it. He wants to give us more. But if we're not going to be grateful about it, maybe we won't get that, right? But he takes a lot of pleasure in giving us more and more because he's got boundless gifts to give. And he is, as we all know, he's the Pantocrator. He's the Almighty that has everything that, and has plenty and wants to share it. He wouldn't have created it if he didn't want to share that vastness of glories that he had all for himself. But he wanted to share it with us. And he created us to share it with us. So let's delve into 3 aspects of Thanksgiving, and we'll just take them one at a time. This is a short talk. It's not going to be long. But let's look at those 3 aspects individually and see why do we really need to give thanks to God. So the first one is looking at gratitude as a virtue. Our church, especially our Coptic church, but Christianity in general, teaches us to be thankful and puts a lot of emphasis on thanksgiving. We start every single prayer with prayer of thanksgiving. We start liturgy with the prayer of thanksgiving. If we look at the models of the prayers of the saints in the Old Testament or the New Testament, they always start with first thanking God and then requesting whatever it is that they want. And we'll cover we'll pick some of those samples a little later on. Saint Chrysostom says, gratitude is the fairest blossom which springs from the soul. He really, really is beautifully conveying that gratitude is not just a one-time thing. It's a lifelong transformation of our heart that we can get into by disciplining ourselves to become more thankful and more and feel more gratitude and gratification.
Who said the quote? Who said the quote?
Said John Chrysostom. So offering thanks is a practice that would benefit us, as we mentioned at the beginning, right? It's not because God needs it. He doesn't. We need it. And we need it because it actually helps us and it helps those around us as well. So let's look at some of the ways that that Thanksgiving actually helps us. Number one, gratitude cultivates positivity. Okay, I am sure you've read and heard articles and things about how people that tend to be more grateful and more thankful of their circumstances and what happens to them tend to be happier, right? They may even, some studies may even go as far as saying they live longer, but they tend to not only be happy, but to exude that aura of happiness and joy to those around them as well. It has the power to increase our level of happiness and to also reduce our feelings of stress and anxiety and negativity. So that's one aspect. Another one is it strengthens our relationship with God. It gives us that sense of connection, that sense of trust, that sense of goodwill that allows us to really be grateful for our Creator and for what He's done for us, and it builds that connection. It strengthens that connection from both ends, from our end as well as from God's end as well. It also helps us with our spiritual growth. Why? Because when we give thanksgiving, we feel more humble, and that humility makes us feel more like we are actually dependent on God for our well-being. It's not that I'm well or I'm physically fit because of my powers or because I work out every day. It's because God gave me that health. It's because God gave me that that well-being. It's because God gave me the discipline and the time to allow me to work out. It's all those things that, again, really came, the source of which was from God. And so it helps me build on that and grow spiritually. It also enhances my mental and my emotional health. Gratitude can help us cope with some of the challenges around us. So when we become happy, as we mentioned earlier, and more grateful and more thankful and just generally living a life of joy, which is what God wants for us, it not only reduces our level of stress, but also allows us to be able to withstand more calamities, more struggles, more stresses in life, and be more resilient in the face of adversity. And finally, it also encourages generosity. So what happens is when I feel grateful, I feel happy. When I feel happy, I tend more to give to people around me, pay it forward kind of thing, right? So I see somebody and I'm more willing and I'm more inclined to say good things or pass on a positive remark or give away things, and that makes them happy, which in turn, again, it's that ripple effect that we hear about that happens because of one positive action that we take. So that's one aspect, which is gratitude as a virtue. Let's go to the second aspect. If gratitude is a virtue, and thanksgiving is something that the church teaches us and the Bible teaches us to do because it's good for us, should we be thankful even in hard times? Put differently, should we always be thankful? So we know it's easy to give thanks when we're well, right? Easier. We take a lot for granted, yes, but it's still a little easier to give thanks when we're well, right? Much, much more difficult to give thanks when we're not well, when bad things have happened to us or we're experiencing some challenging times. And that's when we are actually truly tested. C.S.
I'm sorry, don't mean to interrupt.
Okay.
But I've always had an issue with being grateful just by force myself to believe that everything good that's happened around me is from God. This is not like somebody did something nice to me, so I saw it and I felt it, so I say thank you. But from God, good things happen to good people and bad people, to believers and unbelievers, even to atheists. But I think it's multi-dimension process. Should I start to thank God even without feeling anything, even doubting that anything happens maybe by chance, or maybe because I'm good, or maybe just like that? Or I start to pray first, let me feel your hands, because this is what I really care about. Like the sense of His hands in whatever gift we're being given is more important than the gift itself. So it's not like a state of denial more than it's like I respect Him more than to keep thanking Him when I feel like I'm just forcing myself to believe, like, you know, a lie told repeatedly enough becomes the truth. So I don't want to treat it like it's kind of fard or like otherwise, you know.
That's a good question. That's a good question, and I think we started to talk a little bit with a little bit of that point. So I'll cover it a little bit, and I think we're going to cover some of that a little later too. But just to answer your question, what should I do if I don't feel the need to give thanks? Should I force myself, or should I pray to feel the reasons, or to feel the gifts so that I can give thanks? Right? That's your question in a nutshell. The easy answer is both. But what you may have missed a little earlier is God does not. I think it was a quote from Pope Shenouda. I don't know if you heard it when you walked in. It was. Let me read it again to you. He says, "The essence of thanksgiving is giving thanks with a heart full of love, rather than a mind preoccupied with obligations." And my comment on that is, God does not want to hear thanks just because you feel obligated to give thanks. He doesn't want that. He wants to hear thanks from you that are coming out of love for an appreciation and gratification for what He's done to you. Okay, so what if you don't feel that? Then what do? Do a couple of things. You said one of them. Pray. Pray to God to open your eyes to what He's providing you, because there's a lot. But the second thing is, make it an exercise, and that's for all of us, including myself, obviously. Make it an exercise every time you stand up to pray, to start thinking of those positive things that have happened to you that you may have taken for granted. Just list them out. When you start listing them out, you'll start realizing, how much God has done that actually necessitates thanksgiving. I think you walked in a little late. So one of the things we mentioned earlier was that even the little things that happen to us. Sometimes I give a story or two. I'm not going to repeat it because I don't want to repeat it for everybody. But basically, because these things are happening to us every day, that the ability to take a fresh breath of air, the ability to be able to dress ourselves, the ability to just do normal things every day, because it happened to us every day, and since we were born, we just take it for granted. We assume that that's our right now, but it isn't. It's a gift from God, and just because He may stop one day doesn't give us the right to be upset and demand that He give it back to us. So we need to be thankful for those things, because again, and there was a quote that I mentioned, that any gift that God gives us is always bound to increase unless it's without thanks. This is one of the quotes of the Desert Fathers. He said that no gift is without increase except that which is without thanks. There's an actual. I'm gonna digress for a second because I think this answers your question as well. It's a Thanksgiving observance. Does any of you attend Nativity liturgy? No? Okay, so you wouldn't have heard this. This was read after communion in Nativity last Sunday, and I liked it, so I looked it up on the internet and just downloaded it. It's a poem by an author unknown. He says, "Count your blessings instead of your crosses. Count your gains instead of your losses. Count your joys instead of your woes. Count your friends instead of your foes. Count your smiles instead of your tears. Count your courage instead of your fears. Count your full years instead of your lean. Count your kind deeds instead of your mean. Count your health instead of your wealth. Count on God instead of yourself." There's so much to be thankful for if we just look for those things. And if we keep reminding ourselves of the things that we have, that others may not, we will naturally become more and more grateful and feel that inclination to give thanks for.
Thank you.
So we were talking, we were starting to talk about should we give thanks to God in hard times, and it's harder. C.S. Lewis, I think you probably all know, is a Christian writer and an author. He says, I thank God that He didn't answer some of my prayers, for they were short-sighted and selfish. We don't realize that, and we don't see that when we are praying for it. But often God reveals after the fact that it would have been short-sighted of us to get to the thing that we asked for. God had something much bigger and much better for us planned. Or maybe He was giving this as an opportunity for you to gain patience and to gain another virtue, because He knew by giving it to you, it may not work out. There was an actual true story, which was very interesting, because that's not normally how God behaves. But I'm going to try and remember the details. So bear with me if I screw it up. There was this poor man that used to always, again, this is a true story. That man used to always go around, take the little that he has, and at the end of a working day, go around and give it to his poor neighbors, poorer than him. So he would actually go out and work hard all day long, make enough, for his living, and whatever is what he would take out of his needs even, and just give to the poor people around him, all of his neighbors that didn't even have the ability to work as hard as he did. And he was very happy and was very grateful, and people were obviously very grateful for what he did to them. And there was that priest in the city who, or was a visiting priest, I think, and he saw what that man did, and just couldn't believe, what the man was doing. He was poor himself, and yet he gave out of his needs to everybody that around them every single day. And he was happy about it. And he thought, oh my God, if God gives them even more, He'd be able to do great things. So he started diligently praying to God to give that man more money and more wealth, so he can actually give more. And a message came to him in his prayers, I don't remember how, that may not be the best for him. And he goes, but I know, Lord, he's such a kind man. He's such a good man. He's got such a pure heart. And if he has more, he will be able to give more. And he just was very insistent in his prayers. So God, I guess, wanting to teach him a lesson, actually gave that man a lot of wealth one day. He came unto a treasure, and overnight became a wealthy man, because he found that treasure in the field where he was working. Now, again, this is not typical of God, not typical of the stories that we hear, but it is a story that I heard, and I know it I understand it to be true. The wealth made him go seek ways to now figure out what to do with that money. So he started consulting with, people that are out in the city. He moved away from that village. He started figuring out where he could live, what he could do with the money to invest it, And before you know it, he was caught up in the wealth of things. He was caught up with life and started forgetting everything about giving away to others. He was so concerned and preoccupied with, how do I take care of that wealth that befell me, that God gave me? And before you know it, his life of giving was just non-existent. And he drifted away. That made him drift away from even his life with God. Okay, so his prayers went down, his reading the Bible went down, his entire life started drifting away from God slowly. And all because of that wealth that befell him. And so that visiting priest one day came back to the village and asked about that man, and they told him what happened to them. Well, he's now actually a very mean man. He's no longer the man that we knew before, and he's just become very different. And he realized his mistake and started praying so hard for God to redeem that man and to save him, because he thought that he had a heart that didn't deserve how things turned out for him. And eventually, he lost everything, and eventually he came back to regret what he did, and he came back to his original life. But it just goes to show you that sometimes not getting what you think would be good for you may actually be for a reason that God knows and that you don't realize. But it is hard to see that when you're in a challenging situation. It's hard to see through the challenge what God has for you, in store for you. There's a quote and there's a story I want to share with you. The quote is by C.S. Lewis, and he says, we ought to give thanks for all fortune. If it is good, because it's good. If bad, because it works in us patience, humility, contempt of this world, and the hope of our eternal country. So C.S. Lewis was a very wise man. And he's seeing through this. God is the giver of good. Now, if he gives you something that looks good, then thank him for what's good. If he gives you something that doesn't look good, it's still good. It just, you may not realize it. Maybe what's good out of it is at a minimum, the examples he gave is maybe he's looking for you to gain a virtue, like patience, humility, contempt for the world, the hope for the everlasting life, and so on. And that also reminds me of another story. I don't know if I've mentioned that story in this forum here. But if you've heard it, you would have heard it a couple of years ago. So hopefully you either forgot or you didn't hear it. This was a king that lived in the old days. This is a symbolic story. It's not a true story. A king that had his guard with him, or his servant. We'll call him a guard. And he was a very close friend to him. He accompanied him on all of his, adventures, trips, gaming, whatever he was doing. That companion was always there with him. But the companion was Christian and was always thankful for what God did. No matter what, good or bad, he had one thing to say. This is good. Thank God for it. Okay? Something bad happens. This is good. Thank God for it. Has any of you heard that story? No? Okay. So he kept saying that, and the king would look at him funny and go, okay, I see that thing is good, and he's thanking God for it. Great. But that was not good. I don't get what he's saying, but he didn't care. He was, that companion was, that's how he thought. He was happy with that. The king didn't care. Okay? Until one day, the king was out on a shooting trip. Shooting, what I mean is he was, what's the word? Hunting, thank you. Hunting trip. And he was shooting an animal, and by something went wrong, and he shot his finger instead. And his finger just flew off. And so the king was so upset, and he was bleeding. And of course, what does the companion do? He says, this is good, thank God for it. And the king was furious. How could you say that? He was so furious, so mad at him, that he took him and threw him in prison. And just intentionally forgot all about him for a whole year. One day, he goes out on another hunting trip, and he ventures a little further into the forest and gets captured by cannibals. And so the cannibals seize him, they tie him up, and they take him to their chief. And their chief decides, okay, we're going to make him an offering to our God. So they tie him to a pole, ready to set him aflame and offer him to their God, and then eat him alive after, or eat him dead, whatever, after he dies. And then all of a sudden, one person notices that he has a missing finger, and they all stop because they feel, oh, that's a bad omen. We can't offer to our God something that's incomplete. Untie him, let him go. That's not good. That's not a good offering to God. And immediately the king realizes, oh, this was good, and I should have been thankful to God for it, because had I not had that accident, I would have been eaten alive right now. And so he runs back to his friend in prison and goes in and just basically jumps on him and says, I am so sorry for what I've done to you. He goes, why? What happened? He goes, I was so wrong about you all along. You were absolutely right. This was good, and I should have thanked God for it. And here's the whole story. And the companion says, yeah, God is always a giver of good, and we should always be thankful for it. And the king is so remorseful. He goes, but I've done you so wrong all this whole year. And the servant goes, no, this was good. Thank God for it. And the king goes, what do you mean? He goes, because if you hadn't put me in prison, I would have been with you on that trip, and I would have been eaten alive. So things work in mysterious ways, right? But true faith in the fact that God always does good really, really helps us more than helps God.
I really like this story, but sometimes we don't get to see the why. And I think, I mean, personally, this is where I struggle sometimes. That yes, there's always a reason behind things. And I think that there is a satisfaction in knowing the why, but not all the time we get to know the why.
Absolutely true. And sometimes God will not reveal the why until we make it to heaven. And so what we need to do is remind ourselves of those little tiny stories that we share, because it tells us that there is a why. We just may not know what it is. And that should help us strengthen our faith. And in turn, our faith should help us appreciate and be more thankful, and so on. It's a virtuous cycle that we just need to accept with faith. Because you're right. Sometimes we won't know for years. Sometimes we may never know until we make it to heaven. We will one day.
Sometimes we don't necessarily have that patience.
And sometimes we don't. You're right. But that's another virtue that we can gain. And that's exactly what C.S. Lewis means, right? When he says, I'll read it again, right? And he goes, thank him for all fortune. If it's good, it's because it's good. If it's bad, because it works in us patience, right? Or humility, or contempt for the world. So he's being very purposeful with what he's saying. It's there are other virtues that we can gain by just accepting that and having faith that this is how it's going to work out at the end. And so in hindsight, we realize that those difficulties are actually blessings in disguise. And if we have that mindset and that attitude, and we keep reminding ourselves of that, we will always live a life of thanksgiving. There's a very nice book by Pope Shenouda that's called The Life of Thanksgiving. It's if you get a chance to read it, it's very nice. And I think it's translated in English as well. Okay, so let's go to the third and last aspect of the talk today, and that is Thanksgiving as a form of worship. So our church, the tradition of our church, places a lot of importance and a lot of focus on Thanksgiving as an essential element of our worship and our worship practice. St. Basil the Great emphasizes this by saying that when you sit down to eat, pray. When you eat bread, do so thanking him for being so generous to you. In other words, even the smallest of things, don't take for granted. Offer thanks. This will get you in the habit. Back to the question that came there from the back, it'll get you in the habit of thanking God for the smallest things, so that when bigger things happen, it's easier for you to be thankful for it. Some of the prophets in the Old Testament who were known to go through a lot of suffering, like Jeremiah and like Isaiah and even David. You look at what they say in their prayers. Jeremiah, for example, in 10:6 says, "There is none like you, O Lord. You are great, and your name is great in might." Now, this is the same Jeremiah that gave us the Lamentations, right, that we read on Good Friday, right? His life was very harsh, and he suffered a lot, but yet he saw a reason to give God thanks. David in his Psalm 107 says, "Give thanks to the Lord of hosts, for the Lord is good, for his steadfast love endures forever." And Isaiah, who was the biggest prophet to prophesy about the sufferings of Christ, says, Lord, you are my God. I will exalt you and praise your name. For in perfect faithfulness you have done wonderful things, things planned long ago. At the end, our church teaches us that even the most important form of worship that we have, the Eucharist. Then the name Eucharist comes from the word Eucharistia in Greek, which actually means thanksgiving, right? So our liturgy, our church worship or community worship is a form of thanksgiving to God, where we remember it teaches us to have that attitude throughout our life, where we distinctly remember all the things that God has done for us, and that's why we recite all of those things in the liturgy, starting with how he came for us to this world, how he suffered, how he offered himself a sacrifice on our behalf to save us, and tells us or teaches us to celebrate in adoration and in praise what he's done for us in his life and in his death and in his resurrection, of course, until we celebrate that mystery of Thanksgiving or the mystery of Eucharist at the end. So to wrap it up, why do we need to give thanks? I'm going to read this out to you. It's because gratitude connects us to God, number one, shapes our character, makes us happier, gives us joy, it allows us to withstand calamities and stresses, and offers us comfort during challenging times, so that even during challenging times, we can be assured that there is a reason behind it. So that we shouldn't wait until that happens. We should always be thankful for what we have now, so that when challenging times come, our heart is a little bit more prepared and ready to say, God, I know there's more to it. I know there's more to it than meets the eye, and I'm thankful for you regardless. And then slowly God will start revealing to you how much is actually giving you that you may not have realized, or your eyes may not be open to. So let's end by saying that we need to make Thanksgiving a central part of our spiritual journey and our prayers on a daily basis. Any comments or contemplations or questions? No?
I don't know how to say this properly, but from a personal experience, we've been so much focused on comparison, and I think that is tough when it comes to giving thanks, because we feel like we're not, up to a specific standard, or a specific, expectation that we're not meeting. So I find it hard to give thanks while I'm, in a rush or trying to achieve something, because I'm being compared to it, or I'm being looked that I'm not, in a perfect or in an acceptable spot to specific, people or something. So what are your thoughts on that?
You're absolutely right, and it's actually a lot harder in this day and age because of social media. Social media gives us a tiny window into people's lives that makes everybody else look much happier and much wealthier and much healthier and much everything else than we are. And when we stop and think about it, stop and think about yourself. If you use social media, which most of you do, what do you put on social media? Do you put pictures of yourself when you're frowning and upset and in challenging times? No. You put pictures when you're happy and you're on the beach, or you're doing something that nobody else has done, or that's what you're putting. You're putting these little glimpses of your life where you're at the top, right? That's what everybody else is doing. So when you look at somebody else's picture and it looks like they're really, really happy, pray for them, because chances are this is the one moment when they were happy, and very possibly the rest of their lives is nowhere near that. Feel like, try and make yourself realize that is not their life. That is not what you should be comparing yourself to. That's just what they want to portray. And it's no reason for you to say, oh, I'm better than everybody else. No, it's to be one, to be thankful for what you've got, but two, to also pray for them, because chances are they're struggling just as much, if not more, than you or your family or your friends. So it's just a way to just, you know, you gotta start thinking a little bit outside the box, and again, not compare yourself to what you see, because what you see is not what you get. In this case, it's not WYSIWYG.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you had like a live stream, like a social network that was just a live stream of like everyone's day and life, like it would fail instantly, because
there was such an app, right?
Yeah.
And it didn't do that well.
Yeah.
Exactly, because it had to send you a reminder, and I think within 10 seconds, I don't remember the name of the app, but within 10 seconds you had to take a picture of yourself, regardless of which situation you were in. Mm-hmm. And people, well, a lot of people didn't like it because it caught them off guard in a lot of situations where they couldn't take pictures of themselves. And if you didn't, I think you lost your points, or you lost your pattern or trend, or whatever it was they were adding up for you. But even those that did take pictures, they had 10 seconds to prepare, to do something, right? To smile at least, even if they weren't. So even that is not real. So the reality is you don't see what's real. A lot of couples especially, I don't know how many of you here are couples, probably not that many, but watch out, because when you become a couple, if you're not already, or if you are a couple, that's one of the worst things that happen to couples, is looking at others and just assuming from what they see that others are happier than you are. No couple on earth is without challenges, no matter how happy they look, no matter how loving they may be. Don't get me wrong, there are loving couples that are happy with each other a lot, but they're happy because they want to be happy, not because they're without challenges. Every single couple I've known and met, and by the way, I say that from experience, because I'm a priest's son. So I've lived through, we lived in the church at one point in my life for about 10 years in Montreal. I had no choice but to see the kind of challenges that couples came to my dad with, right? And it was mind-boggling. These were couples that appeared to be the happiest on earth. And then when they came into the office, I could hear their cries and their yelling and their screams and whatever. And it was unfortunate that we were exposed to that maybe. But the reality is, what you see is not what's real. Every single couple goes through challenges, but there are couples and there are individuals that choose to be happy. So happiness is a choice at the end of the day. It's the choice to be happy despite what happens to you. If you're waiting for circumstances or for others to make you happy, you're going to be waiting for a long time. You're going to be very disappointed. There was I don't remember the name, but I just read the article. I wish I could remember. It was a lady who was asked. She was very happy in her marriage. Everybody knew it, and so she had won something. You probably guys recognize it because I just read it on the internet recently. And she was in an interview, and they asked her, does your husband make you happy? And her husband kind of was in the audience, so he kind of felt, okay, this is a good point for me, right? And the first word out of her mouth was, no, I am happy with my husband, but it's not because he makes me happy. If I waited for him to make me happy, I'd be miserable. I'm happy because I choose to be happy. And, she wasn't religious, so she didn't attribute that to God, but the right answer would have been, I'm happy because I have a God that makes me happy, right? Like, I'm happy because I make that choice to be grateful to God and to be thankful, not because of my husband or my wife or my children or my friends or my colleagues or my boss or these are not the people that are going to make you happy. You choose to be happy despite what may or may not happen to you from anyone around you.
Based on what you're saying, I'm contemplating. I think people, they think that happiness is that dopamine hit that they get, versus contentment, which is something completely different. So when someone says, I'm not happy, I'm content, that's like, I'm content with the routine. And if something out of the ordinary happens, that's better, but I don't need it in order to say that I'm in a good place. And I think that's the reason why, so social media is interesting, because I know people that will post pictures from their trips months after the fact. And it's just to be like, hey guys, look what I did. So I heard this quote by Teddy Roosevelt, comparison is the thief of all joy.
What?
Comparison is the thief of all joy.
Oh, right. Yes. Very good quote. Yes, I heard that too.
So I think when you're in that place, especially now during this time, get rid of the social media.
If you can afford it, yeah, agreed. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, so about a few months ago, I had a similar conversation with a friend, and she was like, yeah, like social media portrays the opposite most of the time, and she confronted me. She's like, you know what, like, she said that when she posts pictures, you know that I'm actually sad, like, I actually not happy, but when you see me posting nothing, I'm out of social media, I'm actually happier. And I'm like, that makes sense, because if you look at people, like, especially Instagram with a lot of teenagers, there's a lot of, like, body images, and, like, in healthcare, I work in healthcare, and I see this every single day, like, especially with teenagers, and, like, once they delete those accounts or apps, the contentment is different, the level of maturity is different, the way they interact with others is totally different. They start to see the reality, and the reality doesn't always mean that, you know, things are always going to be great or rosy. Like, even like you mentioned, couples go through challenges. It's true, they go through challenges, but, like, you know, like, being thankful is something that kind of, like, you know, at least, like, you know, when you say, like, you know, like, oh, you complain about your job, like, you have a long day at work and you come home and you complain about your job, but, like, you know, when you're like, oh, well, at least I have a job, but, you know, some others don't, like, are struggling to get a good job, then you start to realize, okay, like, I don't even have the right to complain. And, like, even, like, it's always, they say the grass is greener on the other end, because nobody sees what anybody goes through. Like, you know, like, social media is such a fake portrayal of things in life.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And yes, no, I agree. Very good points. It's funny how it could actually be the opposite of what's going on. That's very true. Could be very true. Any other comments?
I guess it would be worth noting that happiness is, or at least knowing the difference between happiness and joy. Because I don't think we are really promised happiness.
Or promised joy. I may have used, yeah. So yes, that wasn't what the purpose of the talk was. So I didn't focus on that point. But you're right. Maybe shed a little bit more light. Maybe tell us a little bit more about the difference.
Well, from my understanding, happiness is temporary.
Fleeting.
Yeah, it's something that kind of you run after, whereas joy is more internal. You know?
And God gives us joy.
And God gives us joy.
Yeah.
Only He can give us joy.
Yeah.
That's why you see poor people who are very joyful and thankful, and then there's rich people who have everything and they're the saddest.
And they're miserable. Yeah. Very true.
Yeah, and like the richest countries in the world have higher levels of depression.
Yeah.
It's suicide.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's ironic, but it's so true. It's so true. We look at. I mean, those of you that came from Egypt, maybe can probably relate a little bit. There are so many people that live in what we would call miserable life, and yet they're so thankful for everything that happens around them, and they mean it from the bottom of their heart. Like, you go there, and they're actually very thankful, very happy, very not just content but joyful. And you look at people that live here and or have houses and have cars and have this and that, and they're complaining all the time, right? And they're living a miserable life. So
it's funny though, like when you get to the wealthy part of like Toronto, you have these very like fortress-like houses. When you think about it, like it's like separate and high walls,
isolated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what you're trying to say is, or what you're saying effectively, is that some of those people live an isolated life.
Yeah.
They're lonely. Whether they're in big houses or not. I mean, big houses is not the measure. Obviously, there are people that live in big houses and are very thankful to God and offer their houses, for service and for doing a lot, and that's great. Yeah, I'm not trying to say that wealth equals misery. It doesn't need to, but often it does, unfortunately, because people end up depending on it, not using it for good.
So I just wanted to say one more thing. I read Orthodox Prayer Life, which is a great book, if anyone's read it, of Winnemetha and the team. And there's this one section called spiritual aridity, spiritual dryness. And I feel like it's something that we all kind of face, right? And there's always this thought of, if I'm not peaceful, if I'm not at joy, there's something wrong with my spiritual life. And I think it's at those points where you have to be the most thankful, because I feel like there are always tests. Kind of like the way Job was tested. They said, well, he has everything, that's why he's so thankful. Get rid of these things and he'll curse you. So that's also something where I definitely struggle. If you think that your measure of your relationship with God is how joyful you are,
that could be misleading. Usually, that period of spiritual dryness that you're referring to usually is experienced by people who have attained a certain level of spirituality that's typically higher than most of us have gotten to. But you are right. I don't know have you guys heard of the book Elements? Yeah? Have you read it?
Yes.
The first one only? Both? Okay. Anybody else?
I heard it was Gunnar Joseph who wrote that.
Yes, I heard so too. Regardless of who wrote it, it's an amazing book. It takes you through a journey of people I guess, sorry?
Elijah.
Yeah, Elijah, who is born in Canada to Egyptian parents and grows in Canada and goes through the challenges that many of us have gone through or go through. And then eventually, and even though he was born in the church, like his family was very religious and he was brought up in the church, eventually he drifts away, especially around youthful years in university, and eventually finds his way back and then starts experiencing those spiritual growth with God and goes through. You reminded me because he also goes through a spiritual dryness period and he's freaking out what's going on. So amazing, like just so many lessons to be learned from that book, and it's very, very well written, very enjoyable as well, very humorous to at points. So yeah, if you can
There's
get it.
part 3 now. Did you hear about that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm still reading part 2.
Oh, okay.
I haven't finished it, but it's really, really good. Especially part 1, I think, is just really nice. All right, we'll wrap it up here, I guess.